Before we start today's episode, I want to, pass on that a great mentor of mine, Ted Gardner, passed recently. He was the person who gave me a shot to be on the first Lollapalooza. I had no idea why he would give me that chance, but he did. It turned in my life into what it became in many, many ways. He taught me a lot of things about the business and maybe some ways to handle things. But he also turned me on to Veuve Clicquot champagne. He was someone who always had a couple bottles at the end of a show. And if you were in the right place at the right time, he always liked to have a toast at the end of a successful show. And I'm having a toast to you right now, Ted, and may you rest in peace. Here's a toast to you, Ted. You'll be missed, but you were such an impact on my life as so many. I don't think there'd be a Warped Tour without someone like you. Take care. Don't forget to follow My Warp Life on Instagram to hear when new things are coming and enter one of our monthly giveaways.
That's right. You can win yourself a t-shirt and a beanie, which I don't have yet, or even a bottle of Kevin Lyman's hot sauce, which I do have, and it's fantastic. So don't forget, if you have any questions for us or topics you want us to discuss, text us at 818-863-6445.
And if you enjoy listening to the conversations with our guests, you can hear the full versions of all the interviews on our Patreon for only $5. We donate all the proceeds to our favorite charities, and you can cancel anytime. I'm also planning on, Tony, just starting to tell some stories on that Patreon, just me rambling into the old garage band, some of the things that probably I couldn't get anyone to want to actually do an interview around.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. If you just want to hear Kevin Lyman ramble, get right on Patreon. He's on it every night. All right, now let's get into it.
Wow, Tony. So, 2022 has started with a bang.
Oh, my God. A bang, a boom, and then finally a bust.
If you notice, we already feel that our New Year's Eve backdrop here
for
is...
For all those of you who are watching the video portion, you can see our...
is running a little limp already for the year, but it does feel a little bit like deja vu.
I'm going stir crazy. I mean, everything's getting shut down. All these venues are starting to cancel shows. Small bands, big bands, gutsy bands, they're just canceling. Again, here we go, kids!
There we go. And, I just feel for a lot of my friends that were ramping up for work. But I think it's time to get into this episode because I am really excited about this episode. But before that, I want to thank our sponsor of today's show, Poco's Hottest Sauce and Weird Tea, who have been supporting us with some product. Pretty soon, we're going to have to start getting some cash in here to keep this thing going. But right now, we have Weird Tea and Hot Sauce, a good mixer. Okay, in this episode, we'll be talking about my longtime friend, Jason Flom. He represents bands like Greta Van Fleet, Lord, and he's the person who actually turned me on to Katy Perry, and we'll talk about that story in this episode.
He's crazy. Skid Row in the 80s. Who's the other band? Kid Rock? I mean, this guy signed Kid Rock. He was the president of every major record label from Atlantic Records. He was the CEO to Virgin Records, to then back to Lava, and then working with... This guy's career is bananas. I mean, not to mention Twisted Sister. There's got to be some crazy stories with the guy.
We're going to talk about other projects he has, but through his philanthropic efforts, as well as, he's done a children's book we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, he did that with his kid, right?
Yeah. So, Jason has helped hundreds of wrongfully convicted Americans to get out of prisons across the country. I was lucky enough to speak to 3 of them and capture their stories for this episode. Kiera Newsome from Los Angeles, Darnell Phillips from Virginia Beach, and John Huffington from Baltimore. And Tony, these stories are pretty intense. It's amazing what can happen if you start to slide through the cracks of our judicial system.
This is his passion project outside of the music industry, as I understand. And these people that we're going to hear their stories were thrown in jail for a long time, wrongly convicted, and were overturned with his help. Is that right?
With his help and the people he works with, they were able to go in and reverse these convictions, or at least have them reviewed. All these people have been released. Some of them are under review. But, we're talking about people that were put on death row.
Yeah, that's
things
crazy.
Like that. I mean, so, we like to joke and a lot of have fun, but these stories are going to be pretty intense. And I think everyone should listen to them because we have the highest rate of incarceration in the world.
So, there's a lot of people over the years that you've met that have shaped before the Warped Tour and during and after the Warped Tour. Go back for me and tell me, how did you meet Jason And how did it all start with you guys?
I think we started crisscrossing with Jason for myself, even when I was working at the venues and everything. But with Warped, I mean, it was, Sugar Ray was one of his acts and
Oh,
things. So,
really?
yeah, he was involved with that artist and then Kid Rock and things. And, I was, you know, he's someone who's like, I think the best way to do it is just introduce Jason a little bit to you.
I just have sort of a sixth sense, I guess. I recognize brilliant talent and beauty in people and things and animals that this was one of those examples where a woman named Angelica Cobb, rest in peace, was I had hired her to be the head of publicity at Virgin Records when I would just taken over Virgin Records, and she came from Columbia, and she told me Columbia was about to drop this woman named Katy Perry. She said, "I think she's a star. You should meet her." So I met her at the Polo Lounge, Kevin. She walked in, and without even saying a word, I was just like, "Oh my God, this is a star. She's a star." And she sat down. We talked. She had Jesus tattooed on her wrist. I got the whole story behind that with the evangelical parents and the whole thing, and and I was just like. Then I fell in love with the music. I mean, I heard the music that she had recorded for Columbia, and I was just like smitten. The funny thing is that people don't realize is that I was so excited. I gather a lot of my top executives together. I said, "We're going to sign this girl. We're going to make her a huge star." I played it for everybody, and they were like, "Absolutely not. No, this is terrible. Like, don't even, I'm not going to call anybody out by name, but." They were like, "We're turning this label around." You remember I just signed Red Jumpsuit Apparatus, which you had put on Warp. And, and things were starting to turn around, a label that had been cold for a dozen years or more. But so for a minute, I took it back. I took a step back. And then a month later, I was listening on headphones as I was working out. I was listening to Katie, and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm an idiot. How did I screw this up? Like, she's great." But I called her up, and she was doing nothing. Could barely pay her cell phone bill, didn't have a car, and, signed her up. And the rest, rest, as they say, is history. And you put her on Warped Tour, which I couldn't believe you did that. I was like, this is too. I was like, this is, even for you, that's a stretch. But you did it, and it worked.
I think at the time he was shocked because he really probably didn't consider her and how he was developing her as an act for your show. But if you look at the old YouTubes of her on stage, boy, she fit right in, man. It was a great show she had.
I was looking for a song for a movie called Endless Bummer, and it's really funny. That movie might have another life, Tony. Actually got a call later today. I got turned on to the guy who might be able to bring that movie back. It never got really seen by enough people, but there's a great Katy Perry song in there, and I was shopping for it, and then Jason goes, "Oh," and he showed me the You're So Gay video, and I was like, "Oh, wow, she's cool. I want her on Warped Tour."
Right.
And he's like, "What?" I go, "Yeah, Warped Tour." And I said, and I just kind of the same vibe, like that he has, I think, in taking risks on artists. That's how I always looked at it. And, we always say punk rock, and I go, wait, she's got the same spirit. Just, you could tell.
Let's do it.
She'd been knocked back a bunch, and you could just tell that she was out there doing her thing. And that relationship with Jason was very, very cool. But I always ask people, like, who was your mentor?
Yeah, how did he get into all of this?
Goes back and talks about his dad in a very, very nice way.
I'm glad you brought up my dad. Every time I give a speech, and if anybody out there, I mean, I am public speaking is one of my things. I love public speaking. I've spoken everywhere from inside maximum security prisons to opening for Tony Robbins to Ivy League law schools. And, I talk about my music business life. And well, let me put it this way. I always say at the beginning of my talks, this is the story of my crazy journey from wannabe Jimi Hendrix to chairman and CEO of three of the biggest record companies in the world, but more importantly, from being a drug-addicted college dropout to a pioneer in criminal justice reform. Anyway, every time I give a talk, I always talk about my dad. And I always refer to him the same way. He was my hero and my mentor, and he taught me so much. But I think the best advice he ever gave me, which he gave to my brother and I, and which I've given to my kids, and hopefully maybe other people out there will want to share this with their own kids. He said to us, as by way of career advice, he said, "Do whatever you want to do, try to be the best at it, but just make the world a better place." He said, "That's the only definition of success that really matters." And that stuck with me all these years later, because at the end of the day, Kevin, as you know, nobody even knows who signed the Beatles, for Christ's sakes, right? Like, nobody knows, and nobody cares. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's the artists that are the talented ones. We're lucky to work in this in this business, and to be able to, to be a part of the success, and to be, helpful to them, and help drive their careers forward and make their dreams come true. But, the legacy that we leave is the impact we make on other people's lives, right? And that is the legacy that that I think we all should strive for. And for me, that will be, I hope, I'll be remembered as somebody who was able to help free people from prison who didn't belong there, who was able to help people coming home out of the system and help them get a fresh start on life, and been able to have a positive impact on kids through the children's book and animals, and just make the world, like, just basically trying to live up to my dad's legacy.
This episode was probably going to start out a lot about, Jason's music industry career, and that's where we first crossed paths. But for me, it really kind of spun very quickly. And as the more and more I've learned about Jason and some of the things he's done, and some of the things we've talked about, is his work with the Innocence Project. But, before that, it was kind of started with the wrongfully convicted and people with the mandatory minimum sentences. And he's going to talk a little bit about his, what inspired him to really dig into this, and what was the catalyst for him to get so involved in this movement.
Well, it actually started back in 1993 with a case that wasn't an actual innocence case. It was a case of a kid named Stephen Lennon who was serving 15 years to life for a nonviolent first offense cocaine possession charge in a maximum security prison in New York State. And I know that sounds crazy, so let me just say it again. 15 years to life for a nonviolent first offense cocaine possession charge in a maximum security prison in New York State. So, long story short, I read about this story in the newspaper. I decided I had to do something about it because it threw everything I thought I knew about fairness and equity out the window. And I only knew one criminal defense attorney back then. And that was a guy named Bob Colina. And that's because he represented two artists that I had signed, Skid Row and Stone Temple Pilots. And as you know, Kevin, they were getting arrested like weekly back then. So mostly Sebastian and Scott, rest in peace. But Bob agreed to take the case pro bono, even though he said it was hopeless. We ended up in a courtroom in Malone, New York, 6 months later. And I had the unbelievable experience of sitting there when the judge banged the gavel down and sent this kid home. And, he had already been in for 9 years, but he had another 6 to go before parole eligibility. And I was like, oh my God, I have a superpower. I got to use this for good. And so that led to me joining the board of Families Against Mandatory Minimums. And then I learned about the work of the Innocence Project. And I just walked in there and said, I don't know what you need me to do, but whatever it is, I'll do that and more. And that's how it started.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty cool.
You can imagine the rush, though, of being able to go in and have effective change where, his attorney said to him, it's just hopeless. And it worked out.
And that's the sad thing. I think, and I keep going back to that. Unless you're caught in that system, or maybe have a relative that's incarcerated or something for one of these crazy sentences, I think you don't know. So I asked Jason, can you maybe connect me with a few of the people that you've worked with and have been helped by you and the people behind the Innocence Project? So the first guest tonight is Kiera Newsome, and everyone's story is unique, but similar in the same way.
I was incarcerated at the age of 17 for a crime I didn't commit. I ended up doing 19 years and 10 months wrongfully. And throughout my journey, I was represented by the California Innocence Project and Loyola Law School. And these people fought for me for years, for at least over a decade. Come over here, honey. For at least over a decade. And it was a really, really, really cold fight, because everyone wanted to know, how did this girl get incarcerated in the first place? And I was actually in school when this crime was happening. They were trying to say that I had murdered someone in retaliation for my boyfriend at the time being murdered 4 months before. I was physically in class. We have a sign-in sheet, and we have a head count sheet that they take attendance every hour of the day. My teacher, my high school teacher, she testified for me in court, and so did the principal. And I was still convicted.
You think that a sign-in sheet, attendance, a teacher that says she was here, and how could she be convicted?
Well, I mean, let's not be naive about the social economic gap, disparaging gap between the haves and the have-nots, and having a public defender initially because that's all you have, and the nightmare type of a defense when a prosecutor is trying to make their bones and get convictions. Thank God for the Innocence Project and for people like this. Otherwise, there would be complete hopelessness for a lot of people.
A lot of what you just said, she kind of, reinforced in this next clip, Tony.
My parents feel, and I feel the same way, that if I was, white, and I'm going to be honest, if I was white, if I lived in a rich neighborhood, they would have did everything possible. Once they had the evidence that they had, it would have been squared away right then and there. But instead of my parents being illiterate to the justice system, me being not knowing anything about the justice system, never been incarcerated before, I didn't understand my rights, and neither did they. The first thing an innocent person does is when we go into this the police station, the first thing we want to do is be truthful all the way. I feel like only guilty people be the first ones to say, oh, they plead the fifth or they don't want to talk about the situation.
Nope.
Never in a million years did I believe that this was going to happen to me and that I was going to be actually falsely accused for a crime I didn't commit, especially a murder. I've never been to jail before. I was a good kid. I made good grades despite my surroundings, despite being in a gang-infested neighborhood. And, I consider myself to be happy and a very unique kid at the time, But this whole situation had changed my outlook on the justice system and things like that in the past. I'm hopeful about the justice system today because with this happening to me and what went on, I can be a voice out here and I can help promote that change.
One of the things Jason did bring up in our conversation that, these people, they're in jail for 19 years. You could come out an extremely, extremely bitter, angry person. But most of these people that the Innocence Project help, they turn around and say, how do I help? How do I do, people that are in the same situation as me? And it's always interesting, you go through this 19 years and what actually, eventually freed her.
After I did the interview, when I say that the lady came back a few months later, and when she came back, she was almost done with it. And then the courts sent me paperwork because remember that petition was filed. So they sent me paperwork. The governor's office came to talk to me. Around that time, they was commuting people that were doing life and life without in prison. And when she came to see me, I told her that they put in clemency and do she know I'm innocent? And she told me that that's the reason why she was there. So I talked to this lady. They had all my evidence. And they came back 2 months later. The documentary aired on TV and they came back, 2 months later. And I'm sitting in a room with all these lifers and long termers. And I'm sitting in the room with people that didn't kill people that didn't really deserve why they there. But then again, I feel like second chances is a given. I believe in second chances, especially when you change your life. But when you're someone that's innocent and you sitting in a room with all these people and people coming out and they're being released to their families, their life sentences is being taken away, they're going to the parole board and everything, you just know by the evidence that you have that you're going home that same day, right? So I go in there, the governor's office, I get on the phone and the lady tells me, she says, the governor is commuting your time from 60 years to life to 20 years to life. Now, for the average person, you'll be happy they took 40 years off your sentence and you could go directly to the parole board and get out, right? But for me, I wasn't happy at all. And I let her know I wasn't happy at all. And I told her, I said, well, can you at least do me a favor? Can you put that I'm innocent inside of my petition? So the Innocence Project called me and they said, we wanted you to talk to Jason Flom. He wants to talk to you. And I'm like, well, who is that? And my teacher, she knew his podcast. She said, oh my God, he's an amazing man. And I said, wow, that's crazy. I need to meet someone amazing because since I came home, I feel like even my legal team, and I'm going to say this for the first time, I feel like even they forgot about me. They were here for a minute, then everybody disappeared. Then when it's time to do a story, everybody back again. So when Jason came into my life, I thought it was going to be the same thing. So when I was on the interview with him, I revealed things to him that even the attorneys didn't know. And he was like, whoa, it's like I just threw up all over this man because I just felt an instant connection. And after that, he started calling me all the time. And I'm like, okay, one day this is going to have to stop. He's not going to call me anymore because people do that for a minute, then they fall off. No, not Jason. I could talk to Jason. He could be doing 50 million things and Jason remembers Kiera, you know, and I'll say something to him. And I'm like, he didn't hear me. He'll call me back the next week and say, yeah, I did this, I did that. And I'm like, you heard me. So for the first time in my life, I got someone in my life that I can trust. And I explained to him that I was struggling with work and I was having a hard time. No, I didn't want to work construction. Yes, I came home. I was late in age. I'm married. So I decided to have a son, you know, while I still can. So I did. I was pregnant at the time and everything too. And I got 3 college degrees since I've been incarcerated and I couldn't find work. Jason funded my job. He found the pastor that was in the juvenile hall with me. He has an organization that helps with advocating and dealing with victims and, you know, people in prison and things like that. And it's like pretty much like social work that we do and basically saving lives. And Jason funded my career so that I can have a job. And on top of that, Jason has given me the opportunity to see things I wouldn't have never seen. I went to Vegas. He had me living in a Caesar Palace in like a luxury room that I know I could have never afford. He had me with a room key to where I could go to any store in there if I wanted to and do whatever. He sent me to New York. We were at his beach house, then the penthouse, and I went to Beverly Hills. I got to meet Usher Raymond through him, you know, and I got to meet so many different amazing people, so many artists. He gave me a life that I thought I could never get back. And I made him the great grandfather of my son because my grandfathers are deceased. One died when I was incarcerated and the other one died, you know, before my incarceration. So my son was going to grow up without a great grandfather. And he was like, what? You skipped the whole thing. I said, well, he has a grandfather because my dad is still alive, but he doesn't have a great grandfather, you know? So Jason is giving my son something special.
What Jason mentioned, you know, a superpower for good. I think sometimes you don't realize you have them until all of a sudden you try something, you know, and podcasts, it's great when you can anchor it with music and everything. But, you know, my way I teach at school is you can do good and do good business. You can always find a reason to add some good to whatever you're doing each day.
I just feel a little inadequate now as a human being. I need to give back more.
I think, you know, there's not going to be a lot of commentary because I think we're going to roll right into this next story. And this is the story of Darnell Phillips from Virginia Beach. I just got to let him tell you the story.
Of course, we know Jason. He's associated with the Innocence Project in New York. But prior to me being released, I hadn't heard of Jason Flom. But in 2018, when I was released from prison, I went to UVA to do a speaking engagement. It's my first week out. And so I saw a guy on the hallway, this kind of person. I saw a guy on the hallway, and I saw everyone was trying to just get in contact with him. Like I said, again, I didn't know who he was. And so when we went into the meeting, they were, of course, celebrating that it was my first week's release in 2018 after doing 27 years of wrongful incarceration.
7 years.
And so at the end of the engagement, Jason approached me, and I was sharing with him how I love the way that he represented the Innocence Project, and he spoke well about the work that they were doing for guys who are wrongfully convicted. And so Jason said, well, look, man, he said, I'd like to have you on my show, Wrongful Conviction podcast. I'm like, well, well, sure, why not? Come to New York and everything. And Jason did everything possible to get me there to New York. I went there in the hopes that, this would be a turning point in my life. In fact, it was. I had a lot of dreams and desires that I wanted to fulfill, and I kept those things near and dear in my heart. That's what was part that kept me going those 27 years of my wrongful conviction. And what Jason did was Jason used all his connections to not only help me to get into my dream business, which was a automotive mobile detailing business, but as well to put my story out there. And even I needed a vehicle at the time. My family couldn't afford it. We had exhausted all our funds on legal issues. Well, Jason was like, man, that's no issue. He told me right in the break of the podcast, man, don't worry about that. I got you, Darnell. I got a plan. And so when I met him that dinner in New York after that podcast at an Ethiopian restaurant, sat down, it was like a dream come true, because Jason was like, well, look, Darnell, what do you need to start your business? What I heard you don't have a car. Well, I'm going to make sure you get straight. And it was on a Wednesday night. He said, I can't do it tonight, but the next week, he said, you have everything you need. And lo and behold, Jason, that's a man of his word. That is a real down to earth guy. I'm telling you, right? He met every need that I couldn't get help for. For 5 months, I struggled when I came home after 27 years. But in the moments of dealing with Jason, everything became resolved.
I had to ask, why were you put in jail for 27 years? What were you convicted of?
I was wrongfully convicted of rape and abduction of a young girl in Virginia Beach. And, about on my 26th year, it just so happens the Innocence Project, they did some DNA work. UVA Innocence Project out of Charlottesville, Virginia. They did some legal work. They found out, of course, the DNA wasn't mine, but also the victim who the crime was perpetrated on, she came forth and became my largest advocate. And she went to Virginia Parole Board, with the Parole and Pardon Board, and she fought to get me out of there.
Wow. I can't believe that. 27 years.
And I think we, sometimes we're sitting here and everyone's like, oh, COVID's locked us down in our houses or our backyards and everything.
Gives you some perspective for sure.
He has a very solid business now, and he's getting to do what he wants to do. And this last cast, these stories are all, very, 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 intense. But I had to bring, a guest named John Huffington from Baltimore, let you know what happened with him.
But 18, I was wrongfully convicted of a double homicide charge that I did not do. It resulted in the next 32 years being in prison. The first 10 years of that were on death row. Eventually, through a very unique set of circumstances, we were able to uncover some information that had been covered up, withheld from us by the prosecutor in the case, involving the FBI microscopic hair lab. The agent had been discredited. We knew that, but we didn't know that they had brought in outside forensic scientists to review every case that he had touched. Fortunately for us, the Washington Post was writing a fairly large expose on the FBI lab that became an international scandal, but they had gotten the documents that had been, covered up and held from me, even though we filed a Freedom of Information Act for it. So 14 years after that fact, the Washington Post was able to give us that information. The FBI lab themselves did the DNA testing on the hair samples in my case. They were conclusively not my hairs. I was awarded a writ of actual innocence in 2013. The problem with that was that writ of actual innocence only reverses your conviction and your sentence. And then it's turned back over to the state's attorney to decide, they're going to exonerate or further proceedings. Well, in my case, it was the same state's attorney who had just been caught covering up, and he was still in office. He was the longest serving prosecutor in Maryland's history. He was in office for almost 37 years, the exact parallel in my case. And so, of course, he was interested in protecting his legacy, his loss record, whatever. And I had to pay $500,000 cash bail to come home. And the first 4 years that I was out here, I was actually on bail and facing another trial. And He offered a deal where plead guilty, it would go away. I turned that down, obviously. Then he came back and he offered what's called an alpha plea, which is where I get to maintain my innocence and he gets his conviction and we move on. And because I had been, I guess, fairly successful by most accounts in launching a career, I was, workforce director for a large nonprofit in the city. I was overseeing a reentry program. I was working with the governor and the state and the mayor and with the business leaders. And I just felt that I was supposed to be here, that I was having some degree of impact, and I didn't want to disrupt that. And I was still up against the same prosecutor who was, making no secret of the fact. In fact, he put it in writing. I don't have anything to lose if I don't get a conviction. Like, what are you going to tell your client when he gets handcuffs slapped on him? He was abusing his power and manipulating the resources of the state to come after me. So I took the deal, but I then proceeded to file a grievance against him with a state agency here called the Attorney Grievance Commission, who took that on. I spent a year investigating it, and at the end of that, they charged him with several ethical violations and rule violations that he had done in my case, including withholding exculpatory evidence, lying to the court, lying to my lawyers. And he had a public trial in March. He was found guilty of all 6 charges and went to the Court of Appeals, Maryland's highest court, in September. And they ruled on October the 22nd in a unanimous decision, 102-page opinion, very scathing ruling. They found him guilty of all the allegations and disbarred him. So he became one of 5 prosecutors in the United States to be disbarred from, an exonerated or a wrongful conviction case. My problem is I'm still not exonerated. So we just had a national press conference earlier this week, and I have applied for a pardon with the governor to clear my name. In that process, I actually I did an interview with an organization in New York, FM Wire, and they have a program called Philanthrocapitalism. And I did that program, and that's where I started hearing about Jason, because it's Martine Dubin's program. And she's like, I interviewed Jason Flom. And I'm like, who's Jason Flom? And so, of course, I researched him. And then I was attending the 25th anniversary banquet of the National Innocence Project in New York at the Marquis Marriott in Times Square. And there was an intermission. And it just so happened that Jason and I were leaving the restroom area at the same time. And, I said hi to him, shook his hand and introduced myself and said, hey, we have a friend in common, Martine Dubin. We both did her show, and kind of looked at me and said, why were you doing the show? And because he didn't know my background. And I told him who I was and that brief little story. And he was like, oh my God, you got to come with me. And he took me down to his table where he had the governor of Virginia and the mayor of New York and all these folk there, and introduced me around. And meanwhile, Meryl Streep is standing off to the side of another table. And I was like, Jason, I'd really like to meet her. And so he's like, oh, let's do it. And took me straight over, cut through all the people and introduced me. And she kind of put everybody on hold for the next 15 minutes because I was with Jason, and just talked to me, and couldn't have been more sweeter. And, of course, Jason was like, follow me on Instagram. And I'm like, what's Instagram? his Facebook was full. So I was like, I don't know what Instagram is. And so he actually, my claim to fame is he loaded it on my phone and hers at the same time. So that's how I got on Instagram. But from that moment, it's just strange. He asked me to come and do his podcast. So I came up to New York and did Wrongful Conviction with him. And, he called me that morning when I was in New York. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, waking up. He's like, well, come over to the apartment. I want you to meet somebody. And he had the governor of North Carolina was coming in. So, I was part of that. And we just spent that whole day together. And then later that day, we met with the senator from Tennessee. And I mean, Jason's a whirlwind, and it just doesn't stop. He doesn't stop. And I don't know, we just clicked, we bonded, and, we became friends from that moment forward. And, I've hung out with him numerous times. I've been to his place in the Hamptons, and, I've been to events where he was being honored. He's like, you want to be my date? And it's like, show up in DC and attend those to watch him be honored. And, honestly, there's no more deserving person that I know for those kind of recognitions for the work that he's doing.
The spirit of Jason helping them filters back out into the community when they do get out. And that's what a thread of all these people have. They've always, wanted to give back themselves.
My whole career since I came home has really kind of been in the nonprofit world. This is the third rendition of my career. And actually, it's a private equity company. It's a private equity financial services company that supports small businesses, Kinetic Capital, LLC. But, my boss, Kiera Newsome, had the vision, like, it's not enough to just loan money to small businesses. We need to elevate the community in which that small business needs to thrive. So therefore, we launched the Kinetic Capital Community Foundation. And again, with the goal of just trying to have impact in the community, deal with the marginalized communities, create financial equity, try to disrupt the cycle of poverty, of course, bring in, workforce and job training, but also bring in industry, bring in ownership, try to, and create opportunity for folk that never really had opportunity. I'm still passionate with reentry, as is Kiera and our company. We try to be there when folk come home that are exonerated. We take tours back into the prison to expose, the governor's cabinet members and judges and other folk to what men and women that are incarcerated are doing inside to better equip themselves for a positive reintegration through the either educational opportunities or employment opportunities inside. So I'm really fortunate that, as bad as my experience might have been, it also became kind of the roadmap for where my life has taken me now, my career. And I've been able to match those two things up. And, I have access. I sit, and work with the governor and his cabinet, and I work with the mayor and other folk there. And I'm given access to some hallowed halls and some rooms that normally somebody with my background wouldn't be in. So I try to take advantage of that and be a voice for, or an advocate, for criminal justice reform, but more so for creating, positive steps for reintegration and reentry, because folk are coming home, and we need to be ready to accommodate that, so that they don't recidivate. Because if they do reoffend, then you, me, or somebody we know, or regular citizen has now become a victim, and we're perpetuating a cycle. So I've been really fortunate that my career line has matched, sort of my experience line. And I leave other folk to decide if I'm successful or not. But, I put the work in, and I'm in the room, try to do the right thing.
Those are just three stories, Tony, for you. I mean, I'm sure there's hundreds and hundreds of more. I encourage everyone to listen to Jason's podcast. So I wanted him to talk a little bit about his podcast, because you hear these stories and he brings these people on this podcast, and some of the people he has on there, it's really impactful. It can make a difference in your community.
So Wrongful Conviction has been downloaded. I'm very, humbled to say it's been downloaded about 30 million times. It's led to some successful outcomes in certain cases of people who were in prison and were featured on the show and have since come home. I wish we could just open the jail doors, let all these people out, but at least it's had an impact on some. And it's also led to legislation being proposed and signed into law in Washington State, Illinois, and Indiana that's going to have a macro effect on, and just to give you an idea, in Washington State, a legislator named Strom Peterson heard something on the podcast, and he's told me this myself. He reached out to me and he said that the podcast inspired him to write legislation that made it mandatory for police to record interrogations, to videotape interrogations. It's hard to believe that wasn't mandatory, but it wasn't. And now the same guy has just proposed this week legislation that will make it illegal for cops to lie during interrogations, which, by the way, in all 50 states, they're allowed to do that. Nowhere else in the world. Nowhere else in the Western world, but here. And so yeah, it's really had a great impact. And for people who are listening now, please check out the podcast, Wrongful Conviction. And one of the things I always tell people on the podcast is when you get a jury duty notice, don't throw it away. Serve, as much as of an imposition it may be. I know you've got work to do and we all have busy lives and whatever, but serve, because you may be able to save somebody's life in a situation like the ones we see on TV, whether it's Brendan Dassey or Adnan Syed, or all these cases that have generated all of this attention. There are more of those being minted every day, and we need to stop it. And the way you can do that as just a regular citizen is go and serve on a jury, and don't fall for the same bullshit that prosecutors and police and even lying experts. We have a podcast called Wrongful Conviction Junk Science. We have another one called Wrongful Conviction False Confessions, where we talk about the causes of these wrongful convictions. And once you know you can't unknow, and then you can get then you may actually have a chance to serve on a jury in a criminal trial and save somebody's life.
I have to admit that I was one of those people early on that was like, oh, how do I get out of jury duty?
Mm-hmm.
And then I started going. And I think it's really important, like he said, to just see how this system works and watch how these public defenders have so many cases and they come in and they're shuffling, they're trying to figure this out. I think it's really important. And Jason, you've got, right now that's a full life, right? But he's been working on this passion project. And one night I had a great time up in Canada at Canadian Music Week. I was speaking up there and Jason was speaking up there. And we just ran into each other in the lobby. And he told me all about this project.
The Church of Rock and Roll is just something, as time, as years have gone on, and I've become more and more deeply connected to helping my fellow man, so to speak, and animals as well. I devote a lot of my, philanthropic efforts towards helping animals. But the more, the bigger part of my life good works have taken up, the further and further I've become distanced from organized religion. I grew up very Reformed Jewish. My parents weren't religious particularly, but it dawned on me that people love certain aspects of the religious experience, right? Which is the community and the good that comes from it, right? The stuff that Jesus actually stood for, which has now been co-opted in such terrible ways. And so I thought if we could create a new sort of, group that would stand for the things that I believe in, right? Be kind to yourself, to other people, to animals and the earth. Do whatever you want with your own bodies as long as you don't hurt anybody else. These type of things, personal freedom, doing good, then let's do that. And to my shock and amazement, the name The Church of Rock and Roll was available. I couldn't believe it, Kevin. I was like, how could that just be sitting out there? But it was. So I got the trademark for everything. Now we've got an Instagram with tens of thousands of followers and other things like that. And we've done different activations. We did a wonderful event in Vegas at Life is Beautiful, where we brought music to the deaf community in a way that had never been done before, using haptic vibration vests from Not Impossible Laboratories, and Greta Van Fleet performed. And it was just a wonderful experience. And so we're trying to, we have a slogan, miracles happen here. So we're trying to create spaces for miracles to happen under the banner of doing good. And of course, with rock and roll as rock and roll to me was freedom, and rock and roll is religion. That. You see it at every show that you've ever done. You see kids having these, out of body experiences. So that's what got me into it. And I want to bring that back and make that available to people at large. So yeah, check out the Church of Rock and Roll, churchofrockandroll.com. There's new stuff in the works that's going to be really exciting as we come out of COVID.
Hey, I'm ready to join the church. This sounds like the perfect church for me.
And then I'm like, oh man, you got anything else going on in your life, Jason?
Hey, didn't you say he was working with his kid on something?
Well, yeah, let's add one more thing that he's done in the recent times.
I created this children's book called Lulu is a Rhinoceros, and it came from the inspiration for it came from a trip I took to Africa, where I work with an organization called VetPaw, which is Veterans Empowered to Protect African Wildlife. It's U.S. military veterans who are on the ground. Their main focus is saving the rhinos, but they also, help with elephants and pangolins as well. But the rhinos are sort of my spirit animal, and I got the chance to go over there and be up close and personal with rhinos. They're like dinosaurs, and I love dinosaurs. They're like living dinosaurs. So I came home, I was sitting on the couch with my dog, Lulu, my bulldog, and I was telling her about my trip, and she looks me right in the eye and says, well, I'm a rhinoceros too. And I was like, what are you talking about? You're obviously a dog. You're small and furry, and you're on my couch. And she looks me back in the eye and says, can't you see I have short legs, a big body, and a flat head? I only run fast for short distances, and I'm clumsy, and I burp and snore and fart like a rhino. I'm a rhino. So I called my daughter. I said, you want to write a children's book? She's a writer. I'm not. But I had this idea. I had this vision of the bulldog looking in the mirror and a rhino looking back at her. And I thought if we could create a little hero for kids who feel left out, put down, or bullied because the way they look, the way they feel, or the way they are, let's do that. And we did. And, to my great amazement, it's become a hit book, and it's had a really positive impact on a lot of kids. And if you have kids who are, going through almost anything, it's been really embraced by the autism community, which has been very, gratifying to me. Of course, the trans community, and it's I'm really proud of it. It's been a it's just a joy to do it with my daughter, who's such a gifted writer, Jason Flom. And so having the opportunity to work with her on that has been wonderful. It's just another sort of offshoot of my, this part of my being that wants to help. I've always wanted to help the underdog, Kevin. I know you're the same way, because I know you do a lot of amazing stuff behind the scenes. You don't take a lot of credit for it, but you and I are very much aligned on that. I always root for the underdog, even in sporting events, which are not so important, right? But I've always been that guy. I always want to be that guy who helps, who gets in between the bullies and the weak, and that's the role that I've sort of carved for myself.
He's kind of got the Midas touch here, though. I mean, it seems like throughout his career, everything he does, it seems to have a good success.
Pretty good track record. You know, I would say that's a track record, life well lived, and continued. So it wouldn't be right without asking Jason, you signing any other acts recently?
Well, yeah, let's find out what's going on in the music world.
First of all, on the rock side, we've got a band called The Warning that I love, a Mexican rock band, three sisters from Monterrey, Mexico, who
I know
are
that
just,
band.
they're unbelievable. They're locked in.
Yeah, they are.
And if you like Metallica, check out The Warning, because they're even on the Metallica tribute album. They did Enter Sandman. I mean, they're phenomenal. So, but we just signed a band called Yannicka that I'm super excited about, from England. They're moving over here. Female lead singer, rock band that, just channels some of the great female fronted rock bands of all time. She's a superstar. I'm very, very excited about them. And breaking news, you'll hear it here first. Lava Records is now the home of one of what I consider to be one of the most brilliant artists in the world. And that's not hyperbole. And of course, I'm talking about Poppy. I mean, I am in awe of Poppy. She's just really, just an unusual, artist that's so gifted in so many different lanes, right? The graphic novels she writes, her style is, on some next level. It's like she's from a different planet and a different era, and just made out of she's made out of stardust. It's like she is. And so I think, look, who knows, right? We're going to see what record she's going to make. Obviously it's her vision, but to me, if I get a chance to work with an artist that extraordinary, I'm taking that chance, and I'm going to try to make sure that we honor her vision and take it as far as it can possibly go. And check out Yannicka if you're not familiar with them already. It's Yonaka, kind of a crazy name. It means it has some meaning in Japanese. It's I forgot what the meaning of the word is, but I don't care what they're called. She is, you can just look her up right now. Check out her vibe. And the whole band, it's really awesome. They have great management, which is always, I think, is more important than ever. So I feel like Yannicka is the next one up.
Yeah, and that band that he signed in Mexico, they're great. They're electrifying to watch. I can't believe he signed them.
You asked me about music, and it was interesting because when he brought up Poppy, I was like, oh, yeah. But in 2018, they brought me Poppy about doing Warped Tour. And I looked at it, and I just felt that was that last year when we were going out with the big retro tour kind of thing a lot. And I was like, I don't know if I didn't want to put an artist in. I was nervous that she was young. Was she going to be able to hold her own on stage? Because I've seen artists pushed on me a little too early in their career and maybe had not developed that kind of presence, because you had to hold your own on that stage. And I felt Poppy, it was there, but it wasn't really developed enough and not where I was at booking at that point. So when I heard he brought up Poppy, I go, wow, okay.
Are you kind of kicking yourself now?
Well, I think in 2018 it was too early.
Too early?
It was too early. I think it was too early. But, where she's at right now and developed, and I've been hearing more and more and seeing more and more, Jason helps you channel your river. Sometimes that energy is flowing over the banks and it's all over. But he helps you steer it into focus.
Yeah. So those are his picks and recent signs. So speaking of picks and recent signs,
I've just been listening to Poppy lately. Today I've been just jamming with Poppy because he brought it back up, and I go, I'm so excited to see what she comes up with.
No, like I said, he's got a lot of irons in the fire.
Are you sitting there like myself, feeling a little bit like an underachiever?
Yeah, I'm like, thanks, man.
Little inadequate?
Like a little bit.
Little like we better step it up.
Yeah, gotta get moving a bit.
Gotta step it up. And I know a lot of students listen. Get involved on a local level. They need interns. You can look at a link in the bio. They need people to help do research. I mean, if you're thinking about pre-law, any field of law, get involved with the Innocent Project and see if you can help a person that was wrongfully convicted.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook to find out when new things are coming out. For example, I heard Kevin is going to be giving weekly cooking tips.
Late at night, I'm just going to be sitting out there with my garage band, just doing all kinds of things coming up. If you want more behind-the-scenes content or want to hear more from us and our guests, subscribe to our Patreon. All the proceeds go to charity, plus every subscription comes with a discount on our merchandise. A subscription is only $5, and you can stop anytime you want.
Text us any topics you want to hear more about at 818-863-6445.
And always, we want to thank Xavier, and we want to thank Beata.
Yep.
Vivian. And, of course, I had a wonderful time in Hawaii with my great friend, Diego.
Diego!
Take it away.